I knew the house by the sound it made when you opened the front door. The old cedar groaned like a friend who had every right to complain, but chose not to. My grandmother left me the house and a portfolio that made my hands shake the first time I signed a wire as executor. She also left me rules. Write things down. Trust the numbers. Love is a verb, not a receipt. I make a living as a fiduciary advisor in Seattle. I know what paper can do when it is signed by the right hand on the right day. I also know what greed sounds like when it dresses up as family. Brielle sent the demand, and the way she sends most things she does not want to see reflected back at her. She typed her certainty into a phone and pressed send. Her line read like a script she had practiced in the mirror. Transfer the inheritance to my family. All of it. She said the number out loud earlier that week at a dinner that felt like a press conference. 2 million. She placed the syllables like pearls and looked at her father to see if he thought they were real. Vernon nodded, as if he had been born nodding. Dax tapped the table with the back of a spoon and called it energy. I washed the dishes that night and counted to 100 because that is what you do when you want to speak, but would rather not provide anyone a reason to film you. I knew about the affair already. Seattle has a way of telling you the truth if you stand still in the drizzle long enough. It was not a dramatic reveal. A camera caught Brielle and a man who loves the version of himself that appears in other people's windows. Her reflection looked bored. His looked hungry. I did not confront her in a lobby or a parking lot. I moved money like a person who can spell consequence without checking. I separated the accounts according to the law I teach to clients who want to believe they are smarter than documents. In our state, inheritance is separate property as long as you keep it clean. No commingling, no joint signatures, no household bills paid from that pool. The line is firm if you let it be. I had already opened a dedicated account for the estate proceeds when the probate closed. My name only. The routing stayed with a banker who had watched me grow up and knew my grandmother by her laugh. We had set dual control for any transfer above 10,000. We had callback verification in place that relied on a voice print and a passphrase my grandmother would have adored. The passphrase was 2 words she used in the kitchen when I tried to eat before guests arrived. Sit patient. When the first attempt to push money out happened a week after the demand, the bank called me on a line that has never changed and asked me to say the words. I said them like a man who has earned the right to say no. Brielle insisted that her family needed a hand up. She said this with the serene brutality of someone who believes that money is a faucet you simply forgot to open. Dax had a company that looked like a biography written by a stranger. Vernon's contracting business wore debt like an ankle weight. The mother liked to host as if generosity were a wand. I did not hate them. I did not love their plan. My job at the bank taught me to separate feelings from flows. So I wrote a memo to myself with a subject line that matched my pulse. Preserve everything. I walked the house and made a list. The safe deposit box key sat in the blue bowl by the stairs. The notary journal that belonged to Brielle's friend Kayla was in a kitchen drawer under a stack of glossy forks. The envelopes with my grandmother's handwriting slept in a cedar chest that still smelled like soap. I checked the cameras on the porch and the back entry. The system logs told me who came and went in the last month. Timestamps are a kind of mercy. They do not care who you think you are. The first step was simple. Move communications to writing and only writing. I told Brielle we would discuss anything related to money by email. No calls, no voice notes, no ambushes over coffee. She said I was being cold. I said I was being careful. She said I was punishing her. I said I was protecting my grandmother. Then I stopped saying anything that did not need to be in the record. The silence felt like respect, even if she mistook it for arrogance. I updated the alerts on the estate account so that any login from an unknown device would light my phone like a storm. I asked compliance to flag the names of Vernon and Dax and the initials of the shell entities they had formed whenever they wanted to feel like executives. I met with Sage Moriyama in an office that looked like a library had decided to get serious. Sage wears patience like armor. She listened to the story as if it were a ledger. She asked for dates. She asked for names. She asked for amounts. When I finished, she nodded and pushed a folder toward me. Temporary orders to freeze movement on marital accounts. Requests for accounting. Drafts for a constructive trust on any inheritance that had been siphoned into the orbit of the Ward family. A template affidavit for tracing separate property that read like a map home. Sage asked me what I wanted the end to look like. I told her I wanted the money to end where my grandmother intended it to end. She had told me often enough. Scholarships for kids who can see the line between promise and proof. A small maintenance fund for the house so the cedar could keep complaining. A philosophy that gave more than it took. I said I wanted the noise to stop. I said I wanted to walk into my own kitchen without looking at my phone for a timestamp that proved my sanity. Sage said good. She said good endings are easier to aim at when you can say them out loud. She said the work would be boring. I thanked her like a man who finally understands that boring is a blessing. Brielle pushed again. She brought her parents to dinner like negotiators and laid out a plan that used the word invest as if it meant keep. They wanted $500,000 for Dax so he could bridge to next quarter. They wanted $800,000 for Vernon so he could pay vendors who had begun to use language that smells like lawyers. The rest would be placed in a family fund managed by a friend who had a podcast. I listened and ate the roast chicken that looked like an apology. I took a single breath and then another. I said no. Vernon said I misunderstood the urgency. Brielle said I did not respect family. Dax said he would pay it back with interest. I looked at the table runner and thought about my grandmother telling me to pass the potatoes before speaking. I passed the potatoes to no one. I stood and said that all future discussion would go through counsel. I left the dishes unwashed for the first time in my adult life. The affair did not matter as much as the demand. People betray vows all the time and then try to fix it with words. This felt different. The pressure was a business plan with me as the idiot investor. It was a test of whether I would abandon a dead woman's instructions to manage a living man's discomfort. I knew which side I was on. My grandmother had not spoken in a year. But I could hear her voice with the clarity you only get after the person who loved you most leaves you a job. Sit patient. Hold the line. I stopped sleeping at the house for a week because I needed to remember who I was without its walls telling me what to do. I stayed in a small apartment near the market where the morning vendors still load fruit by hand. I ran in the rain and learned once again that the body keeps secrets the mouth does not need to tell. I went to work and did the kind of tasks that make you feel like a citizen. I explained beneficiary designations to a new couple who looked like hope. I untangled a trust that had bound itself in a knot under the hands of a man who thought wishes were a plan. I signed a letter that prevented a widow from being bullied by a nephew with big ideas. I breathed. I ate. I refused to narrate. Sage filed the first set of motions on a Monday that did not deserve the reputation Mondays have. We asked the court to preserve the inheritance corpus as separate property pending division of the rest. We asked for a temporary restraining order prohibiting transfers to the Ward family or any LLC connected to them. We asked for accounting of marital cash advances Brielle had taken under the label of staging expenses. We asked for fees. Sage stapled the requests with a neatness that felt like faith. The bank recorded a weird attempt at a wire on Tuesday. The request used my name and the right account number. The memo line said Family Fund. The destination was a brand new account at a credit union across the lake. The caller had enough details to pass as someone who had lived next to my wallet. The problem for them was simple and old-fashioned. The bank does not move 6 figures without a callback that hits a voice print and a phrase. The voice print failed at the 6th syllable. The phrase was 5 letters short. Compliance forwarded me the audio. The voice was a shade too eager. The kind of eager that forgets how to breathe like a person who sleeps at night. I saved the file and sent it to Sage. And then I sat very still and thanked a dead woman for time she spent showing me what a good rule sounds like. Dax formed a new LLC the same week and bought a domain with a nonsense name. The receipt went through a card that belongs to Brielle. The domain pointed to a splash page that promised consulting at a level that would make a grown man whisper. I looked at the source and saw the fingerprints of a template anyone could buy with a coupon. I took screenshots. I built a folder inside a folder inside a folder and named it after the one thing that would not lie. Tracing. I checked Kayla's notary journal because she liked to feel useful and because she had a crush on the idea of being essential. Notary work is lovely when done properly. It is a kind of small oath. Her log had a line that tried to bend time. It claimed she witnessed my signature on a minor authorization on a day I remember precisely because I was in a conference room under 3 layers of glass. Listening to a client tell me how much he wished money did not make people into whatever this is. The date was wrong. The city was wrong. The ink looked like a costume. Sage asked me to take a photo of the page with a ruler in frame. I did. Kayla was going to have a hard conversation with herself soon. I went to the safe deposit box alone on a gray morning and wore a sweater my grandmother had always hated because it made me look like a student who thinks he knows better. The attendant checked my ID and led me to the small room that everyone uses when they want to feel like a spy in a movie without any of the fun consequences. The tin box had weight you feel in your wrist. Inside lay a letter addressed to me in a script I could pick out in a sea of lies. She wrote with careful force. The letter was short. Use the income to teach the stubborn. Keep the house as long as it shelters more than one person. Do not let anyone call this money a river for their fields. She signed her name with a flourish that made me swallow. I took a scan. I took a photo. I put the letter back. I closed the box. I cried in a way that sounded more like repair than loss. Brielle switched tactics. She tried tenderness as leverage. She played songs while cooking and moved like someone who suspected she was being filmed by a friendlier camera. She set a cup of coffee near my notebook, as if caffeine could bribe a ledger. She kissed my cheek with the intent of a signature. Then she asked again whether I would move the money to a structure her father had set up. I listened and nodded and wrote down the time. It is remarkable how powerful a pen becomes when you have decided to use it for defense rather than decoration. I told Sage I wanted to build the fund in my grandmother's name now, not later. She considered the optics, the steps, the law, then said yes. She shaped a trust document with a spendthrift provision so tight it could sing. She drafted a mission statement that matched the letter from the box word for word, where we could, and spirit for spirit, where we must. She asked me to choose an advisory board. I chose a teacher from my old school who had once stopped a fight by making both boys help her carry boxes. I chose a neighbor who ran a food bank like a symphony. I chose a retired banker who believed in stamps. We met in the dining room and told the air what we were going to do. The air approved by refusing to echo. We set the date for dinner with Brielle's family as if we were scheduling a hurricane. I brought Sage on speed dial and a folder with tabs like armor. I sat at the long table that Vernon loves because it makes him feel small only in ways he can control. The food was heavy. The conversation tried to be light and failed the way light fails when the bulb is old. Vernon opened with a toast to family. He asked me to reconsider for the sake of unity. Dax explained markets as if I had never seen a graph. Brielle smiled the smile that looks great in photographs and said that this could be a new chapter if I just agreed to move what I stubbornly called separate property into a family pool. I breathed in. I breathed out. I put my fork down gently so the sound would not be mistaken for a threat. Then the doorbell rang. The process server had a gentleman face and a steady posture. He asked for Brielle by name and handed her a stack of papers that weighed as much as truth. Temporary restraining orders concerning transfers. A motion seeking constructive trust over funds that had already tried to escape. A request for accounting of staging invoices that looked more like debt laundering. A notice of my intent to file for dissolution with temporary financial orders. Brielle held the papers like they were hot. Vernon stood up and then sat down. Dax said a word he thinks makes him sound adult. I did not gloat. I poured water. I spoke plainly. We will handle everything through counsel. I will not move my grandmother's money to any of you. I will not tolerate further attempts to impersonate me with the bank. I will not debate this again in a dining room. If there is a legitimate need, bring it to my lawyer. If there is a threat, bring it to the police. If there is a story you want to tell online, tell it. The fund will be announced tomorrow. It will do what my grandmother asked it to do. It will not be a faucet. It will be a well with a bucket and a rope and a list of names who deserve to drink. Brielle cried. I recognized the sound as familiar and sincere in its way. She had not thought the story would end here. She had not thought that the silent boy she married would become a man who could say no in a tone that would not crack. She asked if there was any way back. I wanted to tell her that I had been looking for the way back for months and had found only a map of a very different place. Instead, I stood, thanked Ruth for the casserole, and left my plate clean out of respect for the bird. The next day, Sage filed the petition. The court set a hearing for the orders that keep money from changing shape when you look away. The bank delivered a stack of logs that sang like a choir. They had the failed voice print attempt. They had the spoofed domain email header that had tried to pass as me and failed at the SPF check. They had the callback notes from a young employee who had done everything right. We requested the notary journals. Kayla called me and cried and asked if she would go to jail. I told her that I could not offer her comfort and that she should speak with her own counsel. She told me that Brielle had begged her to fix the date so the paperwork would slide. She said she had not been there when the line claimed she was. She said she would give Sage the texts if Sage would consider her cooperation. Sage said she would note it. Dax tried another approach. He reached out to a mutual friend to ask whether I would be willing to invest personally in a small round that would close a gap and save jobs. The friend forwarded the pitch deck because he believed in transparency and also because he wanted to be excused from the meeting. The deck was a collage of buzzwords and hope. It did not mention products. It did not mention revenue. It did mention the word runway 6 times on one slide, which told me everything I needed to know. I wrote back a sentence with 12 words and no justifications. I declined. The hearing arrived on a Thursday that smelled like the inside of a courthouse. The judge had a face made for rules. Sage stood and built the story without adjectives. Separate property. No commingling. Documented attempts at dissipation. Fraud flags at the bank. Notary irregularities. Emails that look like choreography. She did not mention hurt. She did not mention betrayal. She did not mention what it does to a person to be asked to turn a dead woman's voice into kindling. The judge granted the orders. Funds traced to the inheritance would sit under constructive trust if they attempted to flee. No transfers to the Ward family or related entities. Accounting to be produced within 14 days. Fees reserved. Sanctions possible. The gavel sounded like my grandmother laughing quietly at a joke only she understood. I launched the fund in the afternoon without fanfare. A small website with big type that a kid with a cracked screen could read. A form that asked for essays about stubbornness. A board page with 3 faces that looked like people you would ask for directions. A mission line taken from the letter. Teach the stubborn. Help the ones who know how to work and do not know whom to ask. The first donation was mine. The second was a check from a retired teacher who used to let me sneak an extra apple into my bag when she knew my mother did not get off shift until late. The third came from a stranger who said my grandmother had once helped her fill out a financial aid form at the library. Brielle posted a black square and a paragraph about personal growth. She wrote that some men do not know the meaning of family. She wrote that she was making space for peace. She wrote that she forgave anyone who had tried to hurt her. I read the words and felt nothing. I made pasta. I cleaned the pan. I called my mother and told her that I was eating. She told me that the house misses my feet and that I should come sleep in it soon so that it remembers that I am not an echo. Kayla delivered the texts and then sat in a small room across from Sage and cried in a controlled way that says, I am more sorry for myself than for the thing I did. The messages between her and Brielle and Vernon were crisp. Backdate the line. Make him sign later. No one checks notaries anyway. Kayla also had a photo of a desk with a stack of staging invoices and a sticky note with a number that matched a vendor in Vernon's orbit. It looked like a ladder built out of napkins. Sage thanked her and told her that the bar cares about the difference between a mistake and a scheme. Kayla called her mother and said she was going to take a break from notarizing. The bar would decide whether the break would be permanent. Dax blew up my phone in a burst one morning and then stopped. I let the messages pile and then sent them to Sage. He had called me cold and then hot and then warm. He had accused me of not being a man. He had asked for mercy. He had offered me equity in nothing. I looked at my hands and felt grateful that I had a job that taught me the virtue of letting things age in silence until they reveal themselves. Vernon called my mother. She told him that the line is the line. She told him that she had worked 3 jobs once and did not ask a single in-law for a river. She told him to call Sage. He did not call Sage. He called a friend who called a councilman who called no one because there was nothing to do. Sometimes the best part of a system is when it respectfully refuses to bend for anyone who believes his boots are special. Brielle moved into a small apartment that has a view of a wall and a sliver of sky. She decorated it with the defiance of a person who thinks taste will protect her. She asked for half the furniture. I gave her more than half. She asked for the dog. I gave her the dog because the dog loved her more, and because I am not the man who keeps animals to score points. She asked if we could talk without counsel just once. I said we could talk at the house when I returned the sweater she left in a drawer. She stood in the doorway and asked if there had been a way to fix it that did not involve paper. I said there had been many ways, and we had tried none of them. She nodded as if agreeing with a judge. We reached a settlement on fees that felt like justice, measured in commas rather than triumph. The court reserved the right to sanction if any further attempts at mischief arose. The notary issue moved to a board that frowns for a living. The bank sent me a thank you note for respecting the process as if I were their colleague and not their client. I sent a card to the young employee who had stopped the wire. I wrote "well done" and a line about how 15 seconds of doubt can save a life. I moved back into the house on a Sunday morning that smelled like possibility and old coffee. I opened the windows and let the damp enter like a guest who knows where the towels are. I sat at the dining table and laid the letter from the box next to a pen. I wrote the first check from the fund to a school counselor who had sent in a request for 3 students who were brave and broke in equal measure. I wrote the second to a trade school that was rebuilding a program for kids who like engines more than essays. I wrote the third to a librarian who had organized a night class for parents who want to read loan paperwork without crying. Weeks later, we had the hearing for attorney fees and the constructive trust request. The judge listened to Sage walk a clean line once more. The opposing side tried to turn the hearing into a story about feelings. The judge reached for a pen and began to write. She granted the constructive trust over any amount that had been pushed out in the fog between demand and refusal. She awarded fees in an amount that surprised even Sage. She admonished the room gently in a way that made my skin feel cooler. The law is not a stage. It is a schedule. It is a list. It is a place where verbs matter more than adjectives. After court, Brielle and I stood on the sidewalk and looked in two opposite directions. She said she hoped I would be happy. I said I hoped she would be honest. She said that was cruel. I said that was the only way either of us would get to be someone we could respect. She walked away like a person trying to learn a new way to distribute weight. I went to a diner and ate pancakes with a kid at the counter who told me he wants to build robots and that he knows money is a kind of battery. I gave him my card and told him to apply to the fund. He grinned like a sunrise. I left a tip that made the server look up and smile. I have stopped checking Brielle's pages. I have stopped imagining what the apartment feels like when the heat turns itself on and off. I have stopped standing at the sink with my hands on the edge, as if I could keep the world from sloshing onto the floor. I have kept other habits. I still write times down. I still call my mother when I cook something without burning it. I still talk to the house when I am alone in it, long enough to forget that it cannot answer in words. It answers in wood and light and a draft in the hallway that only appears when I am telling myself a truth I do not want to say out loud. There is a boy who fixes bikes in the neighborhood and refuses to charge anyone who wears a backpack. I hired him to tune the chain on the old Schwinn that belonged to my grandfather. He told me that the chain loved to jump a gear when stressed. I said I knew the feeling. He laughed and said that you can learn to ride without fear by listening for the click before the skip. He said the click is a promise of a problem and not the problem itself. I paid him with cash and a story about a woman who taught me to sit patient. He said that sounded like a superpower. I said it is boring and it works. The fund began to gather names. We did not advertise. We asked counselors and teachers and coaches to send us the kids who stay late and say nothing, because saying nothing is cheaper than the kind of attention that breaks you. We read essays that made me put my hands over my eyes and breathe. We sent checks out and asked for nothing back, except a sentence a year later about what the money allowed them to do that they could not have done in time. My grandmother would have smiled. She would have told me to eat more greens and go outside and get the smell of paper out of my clothes. When the decree arrived, it felt like a door closing gently rather than a slam. The clerk had neat initials and a habit of using a pen with blue ink that leaps off the page. The final orders were clean. The separate property remained separate. The fund stood tall on its small legs. The house belonged to me and to the people I would invite to be warmed by it. The dog visited once because Brielle had a work thing, and I suppose because she wanted me to remember that I am not a statue. The dog slept under the table and snored in a way that made my heart feel less like a fist. There are still nights when the numbers swim, and I have to remind myself that I am allowed to live in a world where not every page ends with a signature. There are mornings when the drizzle gives way to a light that makes the house look like it is floating. On those mornings, I walk to the market and buy lemons. I put one on the counter next to the blue bowl with the key. I cut one, and the smell is the only sermon I need. I am ready to file for divorce was a sentence I said to myself for weeks before I said it to anyone else. When I finally signed, I felt not triumph, but relief. I did not dance. I did not call a friend to open a bottle. I took the trash out and then wiped the counter and stood in the doorway, listening to the house breathe. Paper saved me. People helped me. I did not become a monster. I did not become a saint. I became a man who knows how to hold a line without strangling anyone with it. If you are reading this because you need permission to choose the boring path over the loud one, take it. Use it. Build yourself a small, white room filled with heavy folders and a chair that does not wobble. Write down the times. Ask the teller her name and learn to pronounce it correctly. Thank the young employee who stops the wire. Teach someone to understand that a boundary is not an insult. Sit patient. Hold the line. Then, when the day is done, step outside and watch the wet city shine like a receipt you can understand. I keep a copy of the letter where I can see it when I forget that wishes are not plans. Use the income to teach the stubborn. Keep the house as long as it shelters more than one person. Do not let anyone call this money a river for their fields. I recite those lines under my breath when the phone lights or the doorbell rings or a voice tries to tell me that love owes the loudest person in the room a vote. I nod to the words. I do what they tell me to do. I live. On the anniversary of the day Brielle hit send on the demand, I walked to the water and watched a ferry pull away from the dock. The boat looked heavy and calm. It did not accelerate to prove anything. It moved because movement was its work. I went home and wrote a grant for a student who wants to become a nurse because she knows how to hold a stranger's hand without flinching. I put my pen down and listened to the house pretend to be quiet. It was not quiet. It was telling me a story in plank and nail and glass. The story was simple. Do not forget what you have learned. Do not let noise steal your rules. Do not make yourself a hero when patient is more than enough. I think of Brielle sometimes, and I do not hate her. I think of Dax, and I do not fear him. I think of Vernon, and I remember the way he held out his glass like a chalice while asking me to pour. I think of my grandmother, and I feel the weight of the tin box on my wrist again, and I consider that weight a gift. I will carry it until I am old. I will hand it to someone who deserves it more than I ever did. That is the point of money. That is the point of names and houses and letters and rules. That is the point of love when you strip it down to its usable parts. Tomorrow I will meet a board of 3 in the dining room, and we will tell the air which students get the next small miracle. We will argue kindly. We will agree with relief. We will sign our names and stamp the page and put the check in the mail. I will make soup. I will water the fern that hates me. I will call my mother and listen to her talk about the neighbor who always parks too close to the curb when it snows. I will answer the door if someone knocks. I will not expect a storm. I have survived storms. I have learned to prefer rain. This is what I will do for her for the rest of my life. I will not lie about what happened. I will not let anyone rename my grandmother's gift. I will not weaponize sorrow. I will not let greed dress in clothing that looks like care. I will keep receipts. I will read them when I need courage. I will file them and forget them when I do not. I will go to work and tell a man that his mother did a good job, and that we will honor her by doing exactly what she asked us to do, and nothing more. I will stand in my kitchen and cut a lemon and breathe, and remember that I chose the path where I get to like myself at the end of the day. I am ready. I was always ready. I just needed to be quiet long enough for the house to remind me. Rain stitched the morning into one long seam, and the cedar door gave its familiar complaint when I opened it. The house had learned my rhythm again. Coffee and paper and the soft shuffle of a broom along the threshold. No speeches, no auditions. Just the work a room and a life ask you to do when you have decided to keep them both in good repair. The fund found its feet. Applications arrived folded around small, brave biographies, and the board met at the table with a scratch my grandmother never let anyone sand away. We read slowly. We argued kindly. We chose with care. Checks went out in quiet envelopes and came back months later as notes that did not brag. A boy passed a certification. A girl bought boots for a job that keeps water out of basements. Another kid took a bus to night classes and stayed awake because someone had given her a reason to be stubborn in the right direction. The court finished its part, and the bank closed the loop on the fraud attempt, and the notary board took its time and wrote its letters. None of it felt like theater. All of it felt like gravity. The orders held. The lines stayed true. The accounts breathed without drama. A system had done what it promises when people refuse to bend it for convenience. Brielle learned the new calendar. Calls arrived when they should and ended when they should. She spoke about work and sleep and a small plant on her sill that refused to die. I answered about schedules and the roof and a board meeting that needed cookies more than speeches. We did not perform forgiveness. We practiced decency. The difference turned out to be the entire difference. I kept the discipline that saved me, and I let it be soft. Files sat in a drawer and only came out when work asked for them. Alerts whispered only when numbers crossed real lines. I cooked food with names a child can spell, and I slept because sleep buys every hour that follows. On Sundays, I walked to the market and bought lemons and bread and a little fish and carried them home, like a man who knows how to thank a city sage visited once for tea and to sign a final set of papers. She said that the best cases feel boring by the end. She said that boredom is proof that adults held their posts. We stood on the porch and watched the drizzle turn the street into a mirror, and she laughed when the cedar door complained again. That door will outlive both of us. That is the point of wood and rules. I wrote the first annual letter for the fund and kept it to a single page. We listed the grants and the names of the schools and the hours of volunteer work the board put in. We thanked a librarian who had stuffed applications into her bag for kids who would never ask. We thanked the clerk at the bank who had the patience to let a voice print do its job. We thanked the teacher who knows which stubborn hearts are worth betting on. The letter closed with a sentence from the tin box, and I could hear my grandmother in the room, even though the only sound was the heater finding its rhythm. On a cold morning, the ferry cut the water clean, and the skyline looked like a ledger kept by someone who respects straight lines. I walked the long way back and let the rain sort my thoughts. Revenge had been a word other people used when they wanted color. What I had was repair. What I kept was a house that holds, a fund that works, and a name that does not wince when I speak it. There were still visitors I did not invite. Memory sat at the table some nights and asked if the old ways might have worked. I poured a glass of water and set it down, and memory took the hint. We are done arguing about a map that leads to a field already harvested. Morning waits, work waits. The board will meet next week, and the list is long. I spent a day fixing what neglect had left behind. A hinge that scraped, a shade that never rolled smooth, a garden bed that wanted turning. Hands on wood taught me more than any speech ever did. The house answered with fewer complaints and a warmer echo. By dusk, I could stand in the hallway and hear my own footsteps without the floor sounding like it had an opinion. When the first sun of spring pressed its palm against the window, I opened the door and let the house breathe. The cedar gave its old friendly groan. I laughed alone and felt no need to explain it to anyone. I had chosen a path with less applause and more peace. The math worked. The numbers held. The story could rest by the time summer leaned over the block and brightened the cedar. The fund wrote its 100th check, and the board argued about commas with the same care it gave to kids. The house knew my step again. The bank knew my name for the right reasons. The city kept its weather, and I kept my word. That is the ending I can live with, the kind that does not need fireworks to be true.